On Monday, July 1, 1940, as dawn broke over Washington, D.C., the United States Army prepared quietly for a war it was not yet officially fighting, and within the War Department offices, a decision was taking shape that would alter the institution from within during World War II, driven by the steady influence of a black general whose career had already challenged decades of military tradition. At a time when segregation governed every aspect of American military life, Brigadier General Benjamin O. Davis, Sr. stood as the highest-ranking black officer in the Army, a position earned through persistence, professional excellence, and an unyielding belief that the Army's effectiveness depended on its ability to use all of its manpower rationally rather than ideologically. His rise did not occur through dramatic confrontation, but through years of service that forced the Army to confront its own contradictions as global conflict approached. Born into an era defined by institutional segregation, Davis entered military service at a time when opportunities for black officers were deliberately restricted, and his early career unfolded under policies that assumed black soldiers could not lead effectively. By the time World War II loomed, Davis had already accumulated decades of experience navigating these constraints, understanding both the formal regulations and the informal attitudes that shaped decision-making. When the United States began mobilizing in 1940 and 1941, the Army faced a fundamental problem. It needed millions of soldiers, yet its segregated structure imposed artificial limits on training, assignment, and promotion. Davis recognized that the scale of World War II would expose these inefficiencies in ways that could no longer be ignored. As mobilization accelerated after September 1939 and intensified following December 1941, Davis was assigned to roles that placed him at the intersection of manpower policy and operational necessity. His responsibilities involved inspecting black units, advising on training standards, and reporting directly to senior leadership on readiness and discipline. Rather than framing his assessments in moral terms, Davis relied on empirical observation, documenting how inadequate resources, poorly defined missions, and restricted advancement undermined unit performance. His reports emphasized that failures attributed to race were in fact the result of systemic neglect, a conclusion that challenged long-held assumptions within the Army as it expanded during World War II. The Army's rapid growth revealed logistical and administrative strain, particularly in training camps where segregated facilities duplicated effort and wasted resources. Davis argued that segregation increased costs and reduced flexibility, an argument grounded in operational logic rather than social theory. During World War II, when efficiency became a matter of survival, these arguments carried increasing weight. His inspections highlighted disparities in equipment allocation and leadership opportunities, showing that black units often received outdated gear and limited access to advanced training, conditions that inevitably affected performance evaluations. By presenting these findings within established military reporting channels, Davis ensured they entered the institutional record. As American forces deployed overseas, the contradiction between democratic rhetoric and segregated practice became more visible, both to allies and adversaries. Davis understood that World War II was being watched globally, and that the treatment of black soldiers undermined American credibility abroad. His correspondence noted that foreign civilians often responded positively to black troops, contrasting sharply with the Army's internal assumptions. These observations were included in official communications, subtly reinforcing the idea that segregation was not only inefficient but strategically damaging in the context of World War II's ideological dimensions. The expansion of black units during the war forced the Army to confront manpower shortages that segregation exacerbated. Davis played a critical role in advising how these units could be utilized more effectively, advocating for assignments based on capability rather than race. While the Army resisted full integration, wartime necessity led to incremental changes, including expanded roles in logistics, engineering, and, under emergency conditions, combat support. Davis documented these developments carefully, creating a body of evidence that later reformers would rely on when evaluating the lessons of World War II. Education and training became another arena where Davis's influence reshaped Army practice. He emphasized standardized curricula and objective evaluation, arguing that consistent training standards were essential for measuring performance accurately. During World War II, when rapid training cycles risked uneven preparation, this insistence on consistency helped counter narratives that blamed individual soldiers for systemic shortcomings. Davis's approach aligned with broader trends in military education that emphasized data-driven assessment, reinforcing his arguments within the professional culture of the Army. As the war progressed, Davis observed that units given clear missions and competent leadership performed reliably, regardless of racial composition. He reported instances where Black units excelled under pressure, particularly in technical and logistical roles that demanded precision and endurance. These reports challenged stereotypes that had justified segregation for decades. By framing success in terms of mission accomplishment and discipline, Davis ensured that his conclusions resonated with commanders focused on winning World War II rather than preserving tradition. The strain of global war also exposed the limitations of segregated command structures. Senior leaders increasingly relied on Davis's assessments to understand how racial policy affected readiness. Although his recommendations were often implemented cautiously, they contributed to a gradual shift in perspective. World War II created conditions in which evidence accumulated faster than ideology could suppress it, and Davis's methodical documentation ensured that this evidence remained visible within the Army's decision-making apparatus. Davis's influence extended beyond immediate wartime concerns into planning for the post-war force. Even before victory seemed certain, he warned that maintaining segregation would complicate demobilization and future mobilization alike. His analysis anticipated the strategic demands of a new global order, where the United States would require a flexible, professional military capable of rapid response. These arguments, rooted in World War II experience, reframed racial policy as a matter of national security rather than social preference. Within the War Department, internal studies began to echo Davis's conclusions, acknowledging that segregated systems imposed measurable costs. Although these documents often avoided explicit attribution, their language reflected themes he had articulated repeatedly: efficiency, flexibility, and fairness as components of military effectiveness. Educational review of these materials demonstrate how institutional change often emerges through cumulative reinforcement rather than singular decisions, a process accelerated by the pressures of World War II. As Black soldiers served across theaters, from Europe to the Pacific, their experiences further validated Davis's assessments. Units that received adequate support and leadership performed their duties with distinction, while shortcomings traced back to policy rather than personnel. Davis ensured these patterns were recorded systematically, creating a factual foundation that challenged discriminatory assumptions. His role during World War II thus functioned as a bridge between frontline experience and strategic evaluation. The end of active combat in 1945 did not diminish the relevance of Davis's wartime work. As the Army assessed lessons learned, his reports became reference points in discussions about manpower utilization. World War II had demonstrated that total war required total participation, and segregation appeared increasingly incompatible with that reality. Davis's career exemplified how professional integrity and persistence could influence institutional thinking even without formal authority to mandate change. In educational settings, instructors began incorporating wartime case studies that illustrated how segregation constrained operations. Davis's findings informed these lessons, shaping how future officers understood leadership and organizational design. By grounding discussions in World War II experience, the Army fostered a professional discourse that prioritized evidence over assumption, a shift that reflected Davis's long-standing approach. The broader societal impact of World War II also intersected with Davis's influence. Returning veterans questioned why service abroad did not translate to equality at home. And although Davis avoided public activism, his internal advocacy aligned with these emerging pressures. He warned policymakers that ignoring wartime lessons would undermine morale and recruitment, arguments that resonated as the Army faced new strategic challenges in the early Cold War. International observers noted these contradictions as well, and Davis understood that American leadership depended on consistency between ideals and practice. World War II had positioned the United States as a global power, and the treatment of its soldiers became a measure of its credibility. Davis's wartime assessments highlighted how segregation weakened that credibility, reinforcing the strategic case for reform. As policy debates intensified in the late 1940s, the cumulative impact of World War II evidence became undeniable. Although Davis did not author the decisions that followed, his work shaped the environment in which they were made. Desegregation emerged not as a sudden innovation, but as the logical conclusion of wartime analysis, much of it informed by Davis's methodical approach. The transformation of the U.S. Army cannot be attributed to a single individual, but Davis's role during World War II illustrates how sustained professional engagement can influence large institutions. His emphasis on data, training, and objective evaluation reframed discussions about race within a military context, aligning reform with operational necessity. This alignment proved decisive in an organization defined by mission accomplishment. Educationally, Davis's career provides a case study in institutional change under pressure. World War II forced the Army to confront realities it had long avoided, and Davis ensured those realities were documented and analyzed. His work demonstrates how leadership can operate within constraints while still advancing systemic transformation. As historians continue to examine World War II, Davis's influence remains evident in the Army's evolving approach to personnel management. His legacy lies not in dramatic gestures, but in the accumulation of evidence that reshaped policy over time. The changes that followed reflect lessons learned under the most demanding conditions imaginable, conditions that revealed the true cost of exclusion. The story of how one black general changed the U.S. Army forever during World War II is therefore a story of persistence, professionalism, and the power of factual analysis within a rigid system. Davis's impact emerged through years of service that aligned moral clarity with operational logic, demonstrating that even within entrenched institutions, sustained commitment to evidence can drive enduring change. As post-war planning accelerated, committees tasked with reviewing personnel policy drew increasingly on wartime documentation to justify structural reform, and the records produced during World War II provided a detailed map of both failure and potential. Davis's inspections, memoranda, and evaluations circulated quietly through these reviews, offering concrete examples of how segregated practices had constrained readiness and adaptability. Analysts noted that the Army's ability to mobilize quickly in future crises depended on eliminating artificial barriers to assignment and promotion, a conclusion reinforced by the operational tempo demanded during World War II. These discussions reflected a growing consensus that efficiency and equity were no longer separable concepts within a modern military. Within the Army's internal culture, younger officers who had served under the pressures of World War II began to challenge assumptions they had inherited from pre-war doctrine. Many had witnessed firsthand the competence of black units operating under difficult conditions, and their experiences aligned with the empirical evidence Davis had long emphasized. Professional journals and staff college discussions increasingly framed segregation as a liability, citing wartime case studies that demonstrated how rigid personnel policies complicated command decisions during emergencies. Davis's influence was evident in the language used, which stressed measurable outcomes rather than ideological justification. As the Army transitioned into occupation and stabilization missions overseas, the lessons of World War II continued to inform daily operations. Integrated teams were often formed out of necessity, particularly in technical and administrative roles where specialized skills were scarce. Reports from these units echoed earlier conclusions. Performance correlated with training and leadership, not race. Davis's wartime advocacy for standardized evaluation provided the conceptual framework for interpreting these results, reinforcing the argument that segregation distorted assessments of capability. The educational implications of these developments extended beyond the military itself. Civilian policymakers examining defense readiness relied on Army data to inform broader debates about national security and civil rights. World War II had demonstrated that military effectiveness depended on the full utilization of human resources, and Davis's work offered a clear illustration of how exclusion weakened that effort. His contributions thus bridged military and civilian spheres, shaping conversations that linked defense policy with democratic principles. In historical scholarship, Davis's career has increasingly been analyzed as an example of institutional leadership under constraint. Researchers emphasize that his strategy during World War II avoided confrontation in favor of documentation, consistency, and professional credibility. This approach ensured that his arguments survived personnel changes and shifting political climates, embedded within official records that later reformers could not easily dismiss. The durability of these records highlights how change within large organizations often depends on controlling the narrative through evidence. The Army's eventual embrace of desegregation also reshaped its relationship with society, altering recruitment patterns and expanding the pool of talent available for service. Although these changes unfolded after World War II, their intellectual roots lay firmly in the wartime experience Davis helped interpret. Training commands revised manuals, evaluation systems were standardized, and leadership doctrine increasingly emphasized inclusion as a component of cohesion, reflecting lessons learned under global conflict. For educators, the story provides a framework for understanding how war accelerates institutional learning. World War II forced rapid experimentation under extreme conditions, and leaders like Davis ensured that the results of those experiments were captured and analyzed. This process transformed anecdote into data and experience into policy, illustrating how knowledge production within the military can drive long-term reform. The continued relevance of Davis's wartime work underscores how historical change often unfolds incrementally, shaped by individuals who operate within existing systems while steadily redirecting them. His career demonstrates that leadership does not always require visible authority. It can also emerge through persistence, expertise, and control of information. World War II provided the context in which these qualities became decisive, revealing both the costs of exclusion and the benefits of reform. As new generations of historians, officers, and students revisit World War II, Davis's influence remains a vital lens for examining how the U.S. Army evolved in response to unprecedented demands.
His legacy invites ongoing exploration, encouraging deeper analysis of how policy, practice, and principle intersect under the pressure of total war, and how those intersections continue to shape the institution long after the conflict itself has passed.
As archival research deepened, historians began tracing how wartime personnel debates influenced not only Army policy, but also inter-service discussions within the broader defense establishment. Documents from joint committees revealed that lessons drawn from World War II manpower management were shared across branches, particularly as planners considered the demands of modern warfare that relied increasingly on technical specialization. Davis's wartime insistence on objective standards resonated in these conversations, as analysts recognized that segregated systems limited the efficient allocation of skilled personnel. The ripple effects of his work thus extended beyond the Army, contributing to a wider reevaluation of how military institutions defined competence and leadership. In the realm of military pedagogy, instructors used World War II scenarios to demonstrate how institutional bias can distort operational planning. Case studies highlighted moments when commanders faced shortages that could have been alleviated through more flexible personnel policies, reinforcing the argument that segregation imposed strategic costs. Davis's reports provided concrete examples for these lessons, allowing educators to ground abstract principles in documented experience. This educational use of wartime evidence ensured that the insights gained under fire continued to inform professional development long after the conflict ended. The integration of these lessons into doctrine reflected a broader shift toward evidence-based management within the military. World War II had forced the Army to collect unprecedented volumes of data on training outcomes, unit performance, and resource allocation, and Davis's meticulous approach aligned naturally with this trend. By emphasizing measurement and documentation, he helped normalize the idea that policy decisions should be evaluated against observable results rather than inherited beliefs. This methodological shift became a lasting feature of military administration, shaping how future reforms were debated and implemented. As Cold War tensions escalated, the strategic environment reinforced the relevance of World War II lessons. The prospect of rapid mobilization in a nuclear age demanded a force structure that could adapt quickly, and segregation appeared increasingly incompatible with such requirements. Analysts reviewing wartime mobilization patterns noted that delays caused by segregated training pipelines would be unacceptable under new threat conditions. Davis's earlier warnings about flexibility gained renewed attention, illustrating how insights derived from World War II continued to shape strategic thinking in subsequent decades. Within the lived experience of service members, the gradual institutional changes influenced daily routines, from training assignments to promotion pathways. Veterans who had served during World War II recognized echoes of Davis's advocacy in these reforms, even when his name was not explicitly invoked. Oral histories captured reflections on how the Army's evolving policies altered perceptions of fairness and opportunity, linking personal experience to broader institutional change. These narratives added a human dimension to the documentary record, enriching historical understanding. Public history initiatives further expanded awareness of these dynamics, as museums and educational programs presented World War II as a catalyst for social transformation within the military. Exhibits contextualized combat operations alongside discussions of manpower policy, illustrating how leaders like Davis shaped outcomes behind the scenes. This approach encouraged audiences to view military history as an interplay between battlefield events and administrative decisions, reinforcing the educational value of examining leadership beyond traditional command roles.
The cumulative effect of these developments underscores how World War II functioned as an inflection point in American military history. The scale and intensity of the conflict exposed inefficiencies that peacetime routines had concealed, compelling the Army to reassess long-standing practices. Davis's contribution lay in ensuring that these revelations were captured systematically, translated into professional language, and preserved within institutional memory. His work exemplifies how sustained engagement during crisis can yield enduring reform. As scholarly inquiry continues to uncover new sources, the narrative surrounding Davis's influence remains open and expandable. Each newly examined memorandum, training report, or personal account adds depth to the understanding of how World War II reshaped the U.S. Army from within. The ongoing exploration of these materials invites further reflection on the relationship between evidence, leadership, and change, highlighting how the pressures of global war created opportunities for transformation that extended far beyond the battlefield.
As digital archiving initiatives brought scattered collections together, researchers gained a clearer picture of how ideas forged during World War II migrated across decades through policy drafts, training syllabi, and institutional norms. Cross-referencing Davis's wartime evaluations with later doctrinal revisions revealed consistent through lines, particularly in how the Army framed leadership potential and unit effectiveness. What emerged was not a single moment of reform, but a sustained intellectual current that originated under wartime pressure and continued to influence decision-making as new generations of officers entered service. This continuity illustrates how the impact of World War II extended far beyond immediate victory, shaping internal processes that defined the Army's long-term evolution. In leadership studies, Davis's wartime conduct became an example of how authority can be exercised indirectly within rigid hierarchies. Scholars noted that during World War II, he lacked the power to mandate integration, yet he shaped outcomes by controlling information flow, insisting on standardized reporting, and aligning his recommendations with core military values. This approach ensured his arguments survived shifts in political climate and command leadership, embedded in the Army's professional memory rather than tied to any single personality. Educational programs examining civil-military relations increasingly used his experience to demonstrate how systemic change often depends on persistence within established channels. The expanding body of World War II scholarship also highlighted how the Army's reliance on data during total war marked a turning point in institutional self-evaluation. The unprecedented scale of mobilization required mechanisms to track performance, training efficiency, and manpower utilization, creating an environment in which assumptions could be tested against results. Davis's insistence on objective criteria fit seamlessly into this context, reinforcing a culture that valued evidence over tradition. His influence thus intersected with broader wartime trends that reshaped how the military understood itself as an organization. As memory of World War II entered popular culture, simplified narratives often focused on battlefield heroics, yet deeper historical analysis continued to emphasize the less visible dimensions of victory. Within this scholarship, Davis's role underscored how administrative leadership and policy evaluation were as critical to success as tactics and technology. His work demonstrated the ability to mobilize, train, and sustain forces depended on institutional choices that either maximized or constrained human potential. This perspective enriched public understanding of World War II as a total societal effort rather than a series of isolated battles. In contemporary military ethics discussions, references to World War II frequently serve as benchmarks for evaluating current policy. Davis's career offers a lens through which to examine how ethical considerations can be framed as operational imperatives, reinforcing the idea that fairness and effectiveness are mutually reinforcing. His wartime example continues to inform debates about inclusion, cohesion, and leadership in modern forces, demonstrating how lessons learned under extreme conditions retain relevance as contexts change. The long arc of reform initiated during World War II also influenced how the Army approached talent management in subsequent decades. Systems for identifying, training, and promoting leaders increasingly emphasized potential and performance, principles Davis had championed when such views were far from mainstream. Analysts tracing the evolution of these systems consistently identify wartime pressures as the catalyst for change, with Davis's contributions providing a clear case study of how individual leadership can shape institutional learning. As historians integrate military history with social analysis, Davis's experience illustrates how World War II served as a crucible for redefining American identity within its armed forces. The contradiction between fighting for freedom abroad while limiting opportunity at home became impossible to ignore under the demands of total war. Davis's steady documentation of this contradiction transformed it from a moral abstraction into a practical problem requiring solution, accelerating reform through the language of efficiency and readiness. The continued expansion of this narrative reflects the richness of the archival record and the enduring relevance of the questions it raises. Each new examination of World War II reveals additional layers of interaction between policy, leadership, and lived experience, and Davis's role remains central to understanding how those layers intersected. His influence endures not as a closed chapter, but as an evolving field of study that continues to inform how institutions adapt under pressure and how evidence-driven leadership can reshape even the most tradition-bound organizations.